Hello, it's good to have you with us in Basics of Biblical Archaeology. Today we're in session 6, which is a focus on the site of Jericho. You know that from your study of the Bible because that's the city that the Israelites destroyed first after they moved into the land of promise, into Canaan. So Jericho is indeed a site that we can benefit from to look at because there are things described in the Bible about Jericho that we can see and study to know if the archaeology matches it or not. So let's look at Jericho together. So we'll start with a look at the map that shows us Jericho and a look at the mound itself. And here is a map. This is a Israeli map that, once again, as we saw in an earlier lesson, is an east-oriented map. So east is above, west is below, north is to the left, and south is to the right. So therefore, the flow of the Jordan River goes this way, and here we see it depicted in a kind of a purplish dark blue and dumps into the Dead Sea. And of course, nothing goes out of the Dead Sea. So Transjordan is above Mount Nebo. This is where Moses would have been standing roughly, looking out into the Promised Land from there, but not being able to cross the Jordan Rift Valley to get there. So Joshua would have led the Israelites probably on a movement such as along this road down to Jericho, and that first battle eventually took place there at the site of Jericho. So here's a north-oriented view for us just to look at a contrast between the city of Jericho in New Testament times and the city of Jericho in Old Testament times. And so what you see here with all of the black dots are areas that we know for sure were part of the city of Jericho during New Testament times. So you see quite a number of areas here that are all part of Jericho. But in contrast to that, Old Testament Jericho is minuscule by comparison. That oval right there represents all that is Old Testament Jericho. That's it. It's a very small site in contrast to the way the city would have looked in New Testament times. Now we're looking at an aerial view of the region around Jericho, so it kind of gives us some perspective. We're basically looking to the northeast or so with this. And so Mount Hermon, you can see just a little bit of white. That's the mountain. That's the snow-capped mountain of Mount Hermon, the highest point in relation to the biblical lands. And Transjordan is over there. And over here is Cisjordan, the area that the Israelites would occupy. So we have several ways of access to get from the central mountain spine, the plateau where, for example, Jerusalem is, down into the Jordan Rift Valley. We can go down the valley of Zeboim, or there's a path or a road near Wadi Kilt that essentially follows the line of Wadi Kilt. And there's one other one. And all of these lead down into the Jordan Rift Valley below. And then here is Tel Jericho, right down in the valley or the rift itself, very low in elevation. Here's the Jordan River as it's flowing southward. And Tel Jericho is located here. Wadi Kilt traverses down the ravine there into the Jordan Rift and dumps any water and anything with it into the Jordan Rift Valley. And then, of course, this is all part of the Jordan Rift here. This is giving you a little bit of a picture of the Dead Sea. You can see kind of the murky, misty, whitish color that rises often from the Dead Sea. So it's not perfect visibility when you're at or near the Dead Sea. You can't always see it as if you would be looking at a normal lake. It's very different in its appearance. And of course, it's the saltiest body of water that we have on the earth. So Tel Jericho is located at this position in relation to the Dead Sea. And now we're getting closer to Old Testament Jericho, the Tel, and so it's larger than in any of the pictures below, and there it is. And you can see the Judean hills start to rise up near it, so it's very close to that. So it's a perfect place to guard any of the traffic that's coming into the valley or wanting to go onto the central mountain spine. And now our view is even closer to the earth, to the ground, and we can see some of the elevation of Old Testament Jericho. So all of this brown color is Tel Jericho. Again, very small in relation to other ancient cities and certainly modern cities. And now we're looking from very close, a position very close to the Tel itself, and that is the mound, the ovular mound of Old Testament Jericho. We're going to be seeing a revetment wall here. So along the perimeter of the city would have been an ancient city wall, and part of that revetment wall is uncovered here by archaeology. Then here is a trench that's been dug, and a Neolithic tower is found down in here. We won't really be talking much about the earlier periods. We're going to spend most of our time in the time frame of Joshua and the conquest. And then Elisha's spring is here. The ancient site of Old Testament Jericho is called Tel Es Sultan. And Tel Es Sultan essentially is placed where it is and became a city there because there was a spring that's located at the position of Old Testament Jericho. So the fact that you have fresh spring water there, it basically provides something like the equivalent of an oasis. And that would cause people to want to move here and reside here. So in ancient times, that's exactly what took place. That spring provided life for them. Now we're going to look at some of the excavations that took place at Jericho, essentially the main excavations, not necessarily everyone who's ever excavated there. So we start with about 1868 when Charles Warren went to the site and he took initial soundings there at Jericho, and you know what he found? Nothing. So he was not able to confirm that this was a site of habitation. So just because you do a sounding and test and try to find remnants of an ancient city, it doesn't mean that you're going to pull it off, even if you're at the right place where you should be able to find it. So obviously his soundings were very limited, and with what work he did, they didn't find anything of note. Then a Germano-Austrian expedition was launched under Ernst Zellin and Karl Watzinger between 1907 and 1909, and then in 1911. So during those years of the dig, they were able to discover some important things at Jericho, even though it's over a century ago. John Garstang led the first large-scale excavations at Jericho from 1930 to 1936, and he found a residential area that he called City 4, which was destroyed by fire. So, John Garstang was a British scholar. He believed in the historical accuracy of much, if not all, of the Hebrew Bible, and so for him, he was able to connect the destruction of Jericho that he called City 4 with the destruction under Joshua, and he published as such. And he obviously was not well received. His publication was not well received by everybody in the scholarly world because many scholars are not looking for something that will connect the ancient world with the text in the Bible, but the opposite, to try to disprove that there was any kind of substantive connection. So John Garstang felt this opposition and these attacks from scholars, and to this day, his work is challenged by later archaeologists there and by modern scholars today. But he did very good work, especially for his day in the 1930s, going into or getting close to the time of World War II that was started in 1939. Kathleen Kenyon excavated from 52 to 58 at Jericho, and she correctly redated a building that Garstang excavated there and called the Middle Building. She dated it correctly. He dated it incorrectly, but she dated it to the Late Bronze II period, which is the 1300s BC or the 14th century BC. But she incorrectly redated the destruction of City 4 to the end of the Middle Bronze Age 2 rather than the end of Late Bronze Age 1. So Garstang disagreed with her about the timing of it in terms of the archaeological time period. Kathleen Kenyon wanted to date it to the end of the Middle Bronze Age, which is around 1560 BC, but Garstang said no, the site, City 4, was destroyed in about 1400 or so BC. So he had a high view of the Bible, and I think 1407 is the date that he would have given for the beginning of the conquest. So he's 1 year off of the exact date, if that's the case. So he's right there on his connection between Old Testament chronology and the destruction of Jericho under Joshua. So let's see, let's look at a little bit of their work so that we're able to evaluate it for ourselves. All right, here is an image depicting the site of Jericho. As we already saw, it's an oval in its shape, and there are different colors here that represent each of the three main excavational teams that were digging at the site of Jericho. So what you see in it looks like between sky blue and dark blue. So all that blue is the result of the Austro-German excavation that was done there toward the beginning of the 20th century BC. Then the areas in red here, so you see areas of red, those represent the excavation by Garstang in the 1930s. And you can see that he did an extensive amount of excavation, but the Austro-German team did even more excavating there earlier, and probably that's to be attributed to the fact that the earlier the excavations are in history, usually, the cruder the methods are, the more they're just pulling large amounts of dirt out without careful analysis and study and detailed excavation work. So as we get closer to the modern era, that changes and excavation slows down a great deal. And then the yellow area, I almost forgot to mention, is the excavation under Kathleen Kenyon. So she did even less work there in her time in contrast to the other two archaeologists. So now let's talk about the timing of the Israelite destruction of Jericho. When exactly did it take place? There are different views out there, and other people have views that I don't hold to. So let's look at the facts for understanding how we should be dating Joshua's conquest of Jericho. First, construction of the first temple, often called the Solomonic Temple, began in May of 967 BC. We can prove this through connections between Neo-Assyrian record keeping, dating-wise, and they're very careful using the eponymic dating system to date every single year with a different designation of the most important event that happened in that year, such as if we were to apply that method today, we'd say 2001, that's the year of the Twin Towers and 9/11. 2020 is the year of COVID, because that's when COVID-19 came and decimated society because of all of the deaths that were associated with it. So in the ancient Neo-Assyrian records, they connected a year with an important event that year. And therefore, because of their careful record keeping, we can compare events that are dated by the Neo-Assyrians that were also dated by biblical writers, such as the Battle of Carchemish in 605 BC. So with those kinds of points that are common that we can come to and say, we know that something in the Bible happened at this time and something in ancient history somewhere else happened at this time that's datable, so now we can fix a certain date to those, and then we can relative date other events in the Bible because we know a certain date that it measures up with. And so with that, we can know that the first temple construction began in 967 BC. Well, the Exodus occurred 479 plus years, meaning not 480, but 479 and change years before the beginning of the building on the first temple. 1 Kings 6:1, you can look it up. It's very clear. So if going back in time, 967 BC, 479 plus years earlier, you end up in 1446 BC. The Israelites wandered in the desert for 40 years, according to Joshua 5:6. So that had to end in 1406 BC. That takes us to the time of Jericho, doesn't it? The Israelites entered Canaan. They crossed the Jordan Rift Valley on the 28th of April, 1406. We can date that specifically to the very day. You can read about that. I make a defense for that in my 2008 journal article on the destruction of Hatzor, which is one of the cities that we'll be looking at in a future lesson. John Garstang, the British archaeologist who excavated Jericho in the 30s, dated the destruction of City 4 to about 1407 using biblical chronology, and he connected its fall to the end of Late Bronze 1. So John Garstang is on the same page I am with this, just 1 year off. So I have no major qualms with him. Then Kathleen Kenyon came along, who assigned City 4's destruction to the end of the Middle Bronze Age. So she chose around 1580 BC as the proper date for Jericho's demise. So you have to decide for yourself, study the evidence, and see what you think. Is it 1406? Is it a different year? Is it a different archaeological period? Would you agree with me that it's at the end of Late Bronze Age 1B, or would you place it at some other time? So all of these are the issues relating to the dating of Jericho's conquest. And you can see I have very strong rationale for why I would date it at 1406. And again, you can read more about that in my 2008 journal article on Hatzor to see how I argue. So, what does the biblical text say? Now let's start looking at some of the details that surround all of this. So we're going to jump into the book of Joshua and see what it has to say. Here's what it says. And this is my translation. You can read along, or you can look at your own translation. But definitely, being that I teach all levels of Hebrew, I prefer to follow my own translation as being more accurate. Now, Jericho was sealed. All right, let me pause and make a little note here. When you follow my translation, anytime I have something here in a different color than white, such as this yellow Jericho was sealed, it's so that you can look at that as an archaeologist and ask a research question. Is it possible to look at the archaeology of Jericho and see that this could have been a city that was sealed? It was closed in to be able to protect it from attack from an outside invader. Is it a defensible city that can be sealed? Or like with the city, for example, of Megiddo, when the Israelites first lived there, they defeated the Canaanites or Amorites, whoever lived there, and they took over the city, and they had no city wall at the beginning, right? And if you have no city wall, you can't defend your city. So that wouldn't qualify. But would Jericho qualify as a city that could be sealed? Well, we'll take a look at the archaeology. Now, Jericho was sealed, and it was closed off from in front of the sons of Israel. So the Israelites could not get into Jericho because of this being sealed up. No one was exiting, and no one was entering. Then he who is said to Joshua, "Look, I have given Jericho, its king, and its powerful army into your hand. You must surround the city with all of the men of war encircling the city once. You must perform this activity for 6 days. Plus, 7 priests must carry 7 ram's horns in front of the ark." And that's the Ark of the Covenant where God himself is dwelling. "Then on the 7th day, you must surround the city 7 times. And we really don't know from the Hebrew, does that mean they walked around the city 7 times? It doesn't use the word for walk, which is the verb halak. It doesn't say that. It's the verb savav, which means around or to go around. It could mean that it's just that they were to surround it 7 times, so they go around it once, and then they disassemble, go around it again, they disassemble, they go, and that happens 7 times. Or it could mean that they walk around it in circular fashion 7 times. We don't really know. And the priest must blow the ram's horns. So it will be during the blowing of the ram's horn, during your hearing of the sound of the horn, that all of the people must shout a great shout. And the city wall, there it is in blue, and the city wall will fall down below itself. And the people will ascend, that is the Israelites, they will ascend, they will go uphill, with each man going forward. So, notice I have city wall in blue. There needs to be a city wall that can help seal Jericho, if this is indeed the right place, and the Bible can be confirmed as accurate with the description of the city at the time. So as an archaeologist, you always want to look at the text and say, what can I learn or understand through archaeology? Can it contribute to our understanding of what it would have been like at that time? 6:20 of the book of Joshua. Then the people shouted, and the priests blew the horns. So it happened as the people heard the sound of the horn, that the people loudly shouted a great shout, and the wall fell down below itself. Then the people ascended into the city, just as instructed, right? With each man going forward. Thus they utterly slaughtered all that were in the city, from man to woman, from young to old, both cattle, sheep, and donkey, with the edge of the sword. Now Joshua said to the 2 men who spied out the land, "Go into the house of the female prostitute, and bring her out from there, along with all who belong to her, according to which you swore to her." So the young male spies went and brought out Rahab, her father, her mother, her brothers, and all who belonged to her. All right, let's stop there and kind of review what happened, because it's before the narrative here. So for that, we go to chapter 2 of Joshua, where it says this. Then she, and that she means Rahab, then she lowered them by a rope through the window, and that's the window of her house, because her house was against the city wall, in that she was living along the wall. Then the men, that is the spies, the Israelites, said to her, "We will be free from this oath that you made us swear, unless when we come into the land, you tie this scarlet cord in the window through which you lowered us," i.e. to get out of the city, "and gather to yourself into the house your father, mother, brothers, and your father's entire house." So archaeologically, we can see a few important things here. Rahab's house was located against the city wall, right? So that being the case, there needs to be, or should be, evidence somewhere on the site of houses abutting the city wall. Was that true? She was living along the wall, and then finally in the window through which you lowered us. So a window would have to be accessible to leaving the city. And if that is the case, then it can work. Jericho would be a viable candidate, or the site of Es Sultan would be a viable candidate for Jericho. Now we come back up to where we left off. They also brought out all of her relatives, and they put them outside the camp of Israel. And of course, the mixed multitude, the foreigners who were alongside of the Israelites and following them wherever they went, they were restricted to being on the outskirts of the camp of the Israelites. And so this mixed multitude was the place to which Rahab's family, at least, went, so they joined themselves to that mixed multitude around the camp of the Israelites. Then they burned the city with fire. There we go. There's something we can look at to see. There should be signs of the city being burned with fire and all that was in it. Only the silver, the gold, and the vessels of bronze and iron did they put into the treasury of the sanctuary of He who is. So if we're at the right site, we probably wouldn't be able to see from that destruction or find vessels of gold and silver and bronze and iron. We probably wouldn't be able to see those because those were taken into the sanctuary and offered as objects belonging and now holy to the Lord. They were his. He captured the city, and he deserved to have those things. Yet Joshua spared Rahab the prostitute her father's house and all that belonged to her. So she lived in the midst of Israel until this day, because she hid the spies whom Joshua sent to spy out Jericho. Now, the one thing that we didn't talk about with this text, we can find elsewhere, not here, that there was a ban put on the other goods, the other resources at Jericho. If the Israelites captured the city of Jericho, they were to take the gold, silver, bronze, and iron objects, put them in the sanctuary, and everything else they were to burn. So even though the Israelites were a mass, the army at least, was a mass number of people, they couldn't feed themselves if, for example, there was food there accessible at Jericho. And we know actually from biblical history that the attack on Jericho took place in the spring at the time of harvest. So probably there would be food there in the city in mass quantity that they could take and consume if they were allowed. But the question would be, did they follow the ban or did they take the food? So let's see if that comes into play as well. Middle Bronze Age Jericho. The first occupants of Middle Bronze Age 2A were semi-nomads living in tents, but with houses quite different than those of the early Bronze Age. And again, this is just before Joshua arrives here, Middle Bronze Age. Not a true urban center, and burials were performed in separate tombs. All signs point to this being part of Amorite expansion, a people who formed an important population in Cisjordan and Transjordan. And of course, the Bible refers to lots of ites, Amorites and Jebusites and Perizzites and Amorites. So Amorites could easily be residing in Canaan and be part of those whom God was going to judge. The final stage of the Middle Bronze Age featured more of a town plan, including a massive revetment wall that served as a first line of defense at the base of a mud brick wall that rose above. So there were two walls that actually kind of worked in conjunction with one another to defend the city. So again, this is an overhead view looking at the site of Jericho, and you can see here the late Middle Bronze Age revetment wall. The early Bronze Age walls were here. And so there was an inner wall and an outer wall. And probably both were in use at the time of Joshua's conquest. So the outer wall would have prevented anyone from getting in the city. The inner wall would protect the inhabitants from anyone who made it through the outer wall and intended to go into the interior of the site. So this revetment wall is around the circumference of the site, and then a glacis down below it. So excavation there revealed, and here's probably a bulk, and here's a bulk that go and abut this Middle Bronze Age revetment wall. So you can see the slope, the gradual slope a little bit of this revetment wall. And again, it would have been much higher in antiquity, but this is part of the lower courses of it here. Another view of this Middle Bronze Age revetment wall, or remnants of it. And then this represents a photo that was taken soon after excavations there, because you can still see the orangey colored soil. That's part of the destruction there. And of course, that's going to come into play when we're looking for evidence of the mud brick wall that fell. So this very well may be mud brick from the mud brick wall that had been standing at the top of this revetment wall. So remember, we have two walls. We have revetment wall of stone, and then we have mud brick wall that extends above. All right, now we move into the late Bronze Age 1, and this is the period that I would connect with City 4. So approximately for the whole period for late Bronze Age 1, 1560 to 1406 BC. So the houses of City 4 were excavated in the Garstang and Kenyan expeditions. They were small, with small and irregular rooms lining two roads that in parts had shallow cobbled steps going up the slopes. Many of these houses contained a large number of jars filled with grain. Large number of jars filled with grain. Hold that thought and remember what that could connect to. As Kenyon admitted, but both Kenyon and Garstang before her had found. So they both Kenyon and Garstang before her, found jars full of grain. The streets of Garstang's Area A and Kenyon's Area B revealed this as an ordinary part of the town. Storerooms and shops were on the ground level, while living rooms were on the second floor, which is quite understandable given the heat in the Jordan Rift Valley. It's so hot in the Jordan Rift Valley that you would probably want to be in a place of at least optimal airflow, and that would be on the top rather than, at least in the evening, rather than inside where it would collect heat. Another view of the site showing you areas of excavation of Garstang and Kenyon here. And you can see that the outer revetment wall that was from the Middle Bronze Age, it continued in use in the Late Bronze Age. And with this inner wall here, this area here would be a plastered rampart. So that would be, again, very defensible with attackers coming. So this is the conjectured line of the inner city wall. This is demonstrating some of what was found in the excavations. Very simple houses, very small rooms, very rustic, not very wealthy people, it would seem, who were living at City 4 Jericho. So Garstang's area of excavation is here, and Kenyon's in the darker here. Obviously, Garstang did more excavating. This is one of the old black and white photos from Garstang's excavations showing you both balks and walls, city walls and house, well, not city walls, but house walls, residential walls that were built to separate homes from one another, many of which were probably contiguous. Here's another shot looking at beautiful, well-preserved wall, which you can't see today if you go there, by the way. You can't see that. And this would be the pavement of the street here. And so you'd be moving into homes through these entryways and so forth. All right, so this is a picture of what we're looking at, what you're up against if you are an Israelite ready to attack Jericho. You're standing here. You're facing this revetment wall that has a nice slope to it. You can't really climb it. It's not really climbable. Even if you could climb it up to the top, what do you find here? This is the mud brick, the red mud brick lower city wall here. And if you could somehow clear both these two defenses and you get to the rampart, which would be difficult, and you'd have people firing down arrows at you or throwing spears at you or whatever, you make it up here to the upper city wall, and then you'd have to scale this wall or break through it to get inside to the inner part of the city. It's very well defended. So this is a problem. So this is a cross-section of the fortification system. Now, we want to look at this area right in here. This is where the Austrians and the Germans were doing excavations. On that side, the northern side of the Tell, because that's going to show us something that's important to see for biblical history. And this is their own drawing, the Zellin and Watzinger, their own drawing here. This is a wall, this is the revetment wall around the city that they're calling in German, and my translation here is Israelite revetment wall. Now, that doesn't mean the Israelites built a wall, but the Germans, Austrians, and Germans are connecting this revetment wall with the Israelites because the Israelites would have had to overcome it. Now, notice what we have here. Right here, we have an extant portion of the outer red mud brick wall. What does that tell us? It tells us, and we have houses that are here, right? So this would have extended. We have a house here, which means that house's wall would have been right up against the mud brick wall. And we do have houses here in this area. Here, here, and here, that all abut the mud brick, the red mud brick city wall. So this is wonderful because this is one of the requirements we'd have to have for the city. Based on Rahab's situation, her house had to abut the city wall so that she could let the spies out through the window, right? Which is in or attached to the city wall, and they could drop down and come outside the city, right? So her house could have been, for example, this house and the window in here, and she lets them out and they climb down, and they scale down the revetment wall, and then they flee and leave the city. So that works. That fits the biblical requirement perfectly. Then here is part of this towering stone of revetment wall that again is connected to that mud brick wall. So this is all part of that original Middle Bronze Age revetment wall. So if an attack is launched against the city and the wall is knocked down, which way will the wall fall? So if your army is attacking this way, you'd expect that a good portion of the wall would fall this way because you're having to push the wall inside to knock it down. You can't knock it down on yourself. So which way did the mud brick wall fall? Good question. Well, if you look at Kathleen Kenyon's trench, she shows us the answer. And remember, she's not interested in supporting any part of the biblical narrative, just the opposite. So if we have the revetment wall here and the mud brick wall coming up here, imagine this. That's revetment wall. So this is a cross section. She's drawing it for us. And what she shows is all this area in purple. And she calls it fallen red bricks. There it is, fallen red bricks. From what? From the red brick, mud brick wall that stands above the revetment wall. And which way did it fall? The majority seems to have fallen not backwards from attackers pushing it in, but forwards and downhill onto the attackers if they're attacking there. But if there's an act of God that causes the wall to fall without the attackers right under it, it wouldn't hurt the attackers. In fact, they could then climb up this debris from the fallen mud brick wall and more easily scale the part of the revetment wall that remains. So they can easily walk right up here and have very little revetment wall to scale to get into the city. So if, for example, at the moment of the trumpets blowing, God decided it's time for an earthquake, because remember, this is in the Jordan Rift Valley, an earthquake could have come and shaken down the wall because of its activity, and the Israelites at that moment then would have flooded in, every man going forward. So this is part of that revetment wall, and here you see red mud brick, the red mud brick collapse. This is from the more recent Italian team that did a little bit of excavation at the site at Jericho, showing red mud brick that had fallen down against the revetment wall. So here's how we're depicting it. There's the inner wall here, that if there's an earthquake or something else that happens, that part of the wall falls, people can scale the part that remains and go inside in the inner city. And then down here, here's the outer city wall, revetment wall. And so there represents the house of Rahab with the scarlet cord hanging out of the window. So she would have sent the spies out here. They would have jumped and scaled down the revetment wall and left with no problem. So this is just another view of that very concept of a house that's abutting the city wall and allowing for access by rope to get out of the window and down outside of Jericho. Here's some more red mud brick that we see here. Bryant Wood pointing to some of that remains of the red mud brick wall. Here Todd Bolin, a friend of mine from my days as a student, pointing out some of that fallen red mud brick. And so this is a cross-section showing one other thing. Remember, we said that this is a city that if it's the right one, it was destroyed by fire, right? So what do we have here? We have a burn line, a huge, thick burn line that Kathleen Kenyon publishes. So this shows that clearly the city was destroyed by fire. Yep, that fits the biblical requirement. There's even images such as this that show portions where there was this destruction by fire. So this I would connect to the Late Bronze Age 1. I and others would connect to the Late Bronze Age 1 destruction of the city of Jericho. Very clear remnant of that destruction of the city by fire. And then this is a portion that was excavated on a ground level with all kinds of burnt debris. These are flagstones on the pavement, and this is from the time of the City 4. And the pavement was covered with a layer of ash 4 inches thick. Can you imagine that? 4 inches thick with burnt debris. That's a clear sign that the city was destroyed by a massive conflagration. We also have this, jars filled with grain in Kenyon's bulk. Where Kenyon worked, there it is. Those are jars filled with grain, and there's a close-up of it. You can't see the grain too well here, but that's exactly what we have. We have storage jars filled with grain right there where she was digging in the bulk that we can see nowadays. Back to an earlier photograph. This is from Garstang's excavation. Look how large these jars are, and they're all filled with grain. Kenyon recovered 6 bushels of grain in one season of excavation. 6 bushels of uneaten grain, showing that the residents of Jericho, when the city was destroyed, they had all this food that nobody had eaten. And what ancient people would be so stupid to capture a site, to destroy a site, and not steal, not take the food in the destruction? Well, only those who were banned from being able to do it, I would suggest, because ancient people are smarter than that. Then we have this close-up view of a storage jar found by Kenyon. And there you can see right there the charred remains of grain right inside this large storage jar with its handle right there. And that is a perfect example of the outworking of exactly what we read about in the Bible, that the destruction of the city took place in harvest when they would have had grain in mass abundance, having taken it from the fields where they grew it, stored it. They thought they were going to be able to wait out a siege, but no, somehow the Israelites got into the city anyway and destroyed it. And finally, we'll look at some of the material cultural remains, such as the pottery that Bryant Wood has argued is pottery indicative of the Late Bronze Age 1 and not an earlier period such as the Middle Bronze Age that Kenyon was suggesting. Certainly there was pottery from the Middle Bronze Age, but a large portion like this, local ware, not foreign but local ware, is from Late Bronze Age 1. We have things such as this, the flaring carinated bowl, which has parallels at places like the Phos Temple 1 at Lachish, and at Hatzor 2, level 2, which we'll be looking at in the future. And those are definitely all end of the Late Bronze Age 1 periods at these other sites. So the materials, all these materials found here at Jericho match up with the forms found in the other strata at other sites that parallel this time period. And here we can see in this occupational history of Lachish, it's the Phos Temple 1 is here, and that matches Late Bronze Age 1B, and I date that to approximately 1848 to 1406 BC. So it fits perfectly with the material culture from other sites that are parallels to that which was found here. And even more conclusive, and we'll conclude with this, is scarab evidence. These scarabs, Egyptian scarabs, are often dateable, especially if they have, for example, a king's cartouche on it. And so we have cartouches, and this is the back side. On the front side is a cartouche, but these contain 3 cartouches, 1, 2, and 3. This is the whole one. 1 dates to Hatshepsut's reign, 2 dates to Thutmose III's reign, 3 dates to Thutmose III, and 4 dates to Amenhotep III. And look at Amenhotep III's regnal years, 1407 to 1370. Look at the precision. The attack on Jericho happened in 1406 BC. 1 year after, or right around 1 year after, Amenhotep III took the throne as the king. That being the case, in these tombs, and these were buried in tombs, and the fact that they're in tombs shows they're not commemorative scarabs. These are scarabs that date to the deaths of the people who were buried there. They're not passers-by, they're residents of the city who were buried in these tombs. So during these reigns, all of these reigns, we have occupation of people here at the site. So Kathleen Kenyon can't be right that the city is destroyed in Middle Bronze Age, at the end of the Middle Bronze Age. No, it can't be true at all, because these are 18th dynasty, late Bronze Age 1 kings, all of them. All of them. And because of the year that Amenhotep III takes office, there's only time, 1 year of time, to be able to deposit in a tomb a scarab from his reign. So that shows the precision, by 1 year, the precision of the biblical text as we synchronize Egyptian chronology with Israelite history. Isn't that beautiful? So, and there's the front part of that scarab that we looked at. So all of this evidence shows us exactly what I think we should expect to see. The kinds of remnants at Jericho that reflect exactly what we read about in the narrative in the book of Joshua. So we saw storage jars, we saw a burn line, we saw scarabs and pottery that all reflect late Bronze Age 1 material culture. And so all the things that are in the narrative in the biblical text that we can look at through archaeology, having studied the site, they confirm that the biblical record is accurate. This is the Jericho destroyed under Joshua. So, we've looked at this lesson with the intent of seeing what we could study and find at Jericho that may coincide with the story that's recorded in Joshua. And we found plenty. And from here, we're going to look at some other sites that are going to help us not only see how archaeology works, but show you how much faith you can have, how much trust you can have in the history that's recorded in the Bible. So before anyone convinces you that the history in the Bible is incorrect, study the archaeology or come to those of us who have, and we will help you, because we want you to know you can trust the Word of God. We'll see you next time.